There's enough surviving at the site to help us understand that Izapa was a place that pioneered the core ideas of Maya cosmology. Um, the calendar was formulated there. The cosmology associated with the 2012 end date was formulated there. That's related to the Maya creation mythology. So there's spiritual teachings, there's a prophecy, and there's this astronomical science involving this rare galactic alignment that was pioneered right there at the site of Izapa. We can study the orientations and the astronomy and the carved monuments that are preserved at the site of Izapa in much the same way that we would study Stonehenge or Avebury. We can reconstruct the beliefs and the wisdom that was formulated at this site of Izapa by understanding the whole context of the site. Basically, they were saying that the years around 2012 would be a time of great transformation. They said this 2,000 years ago. They encoded this information into their creation mythology. And certainly, look around us today. I mean, our time is unparalleled as a time of great transformation.
That's true.
50 years ago, we did not have space flight. We did not have computers or this communication grid that we live in. So, is the galactic alignment responsible for this in some way? It's hard to say. Maybe it is. There is a factual connection between the galactic alignment and this unprecedented transformation that's going on the planet right now.
Yeah, it's just a very large coincidence at the very least.
Yeah.
Okay, so what years was the whole calendar kind of developed and the cosmology created by the Mayans? And what was going on in the rest of the world at that time, as far as not just what was going on, but the views that the rest of the world had at that time compared to the Mayans?
Well, it's interesting to consider that the development of the long count calendar seems to have occurred in about the 2nd century and the 1st century BC. At the same time, in the Old World, among the Greeks, you had a new tradition that developed called Mithraism. This really started to get rolling in the 1st century BC. It became the state religion of Rome for 400 years, spread throughout the whole Roman Empire. It was a mystery religion, and the main figure in Mithraism was this figure of Mithras, and he slayed the bull. Now, scholars now know that the slaying of the bull was a symbol for the end of the age of Taurus. So Mithraism was basically a mystery religion that arose directly as a result of the discovery of the precession of the equinoxes. And that occurred at the end of the 2nd century BC, when a Greek astronomer named Hipparchus discovered and calculated precession. So it's strange to consider that around the same time, the Izapan shaman astronomers were also finalizing their calculations by which they understood very precisely how precession moved the sky. They were able to project forward to the alignment of the December solstice sun with the dark rift in the Milky Way. Happens in the years around 2012. And then they basically put their long count calendar in place at that time.
Now, what are kind of the core beliefs of Mithraism, and is it from those sort of mystery kind of school mystery religion sort of ideas that a lot of the cathedrals and other things that...
The core ideas of Mithraism involve the shifting axis of the sky. Mithras is the deity that moves time, and it's a processional mythos, but it's also a mythos that is involved in the mystery religion of initiation. A person who joins Mithraism has to go through sort of grades of initiation. It's initiation into so-called secret wisdom. It's a kind of secret spiritual wisdom that can only be understood through direct experience. Direct experience is the only thing that helps us understand the nature of reality. And in these mystery religions like Mithraism, this direct experience is basically of an internal nature, an inner spiritual awakening. The initiate must have a spiritual vision, which is basically the same kind of spiritual initiatory vision that saints have, that mystics have. it allows the mind to catch a glimpse of the big picture and intuitively understand how all the pieces then fit into that big picture.
So how did I guess religions that kind of okay, I'm just trying to think because like weren't sort of the cathedrals, a lot of them built by sort of a lot of people that were in mystery schools, and even though they're Christian, they actually have a lot of kind of those ideas encoded in them, and that some of them actually do point to alignments. I guess, I mean,
Yeah.
did Mithraism have an idea about a galactic alignment as well?
There's a chapter in my book, Galactic Alignment, that is about Mithraism, and the surviving monuments of Mithraism, they're called the Tauroctony scenes. They basically depict Mithras in the center of a zodiacal dial, the 12 constellations of the zodiac. He's in the middle of this, and he's always depicted sort of stretched out, and one of his hands holds the dagger, and he's slaying the bull, he's slaying Taurus. But on the other side, his foot is always pointing to one specific place on the zodiac. And that's the place right between the constellations of Sagittarius and Scorpio. That is the location of the galactic center. So there's a primary focus in these carved monuments of Mithraism that point right to the galactic center as a place of transformation.
So, okay, so, and then did they encode that in any of their architecture or their art? Or, I mean, can we see this beyond just the Mayan realm? I mean, is this galactic alignment called to in other places?
It does seem that the galactic alignment was known to other traditions. I think Mithraism is a pretty clear case, and which is really interesting to consider because it was the state religion of Rome for 400 years until Christianity declared it a pagan religion of heretics that had to be expunged. This happened in the early 4th century at the Council of Nicaea. So that was very unfortunate because Mithraism does appear to encode this galactic level of understanding of time, and it's also an initiatory religion in which human beings could have a direct experience of their relationship to the big picture of time, whereas Christianity unfortunately started to implement the idea that you had to go through the church in order to get your salvation.
So, and where, I mean, are there actual, you know how like the Mayans have so much like hieroglyphic imagery of it. Is there actual imagery we can see or monumental imagery? Where can we see it?
There are dozens and dozens of these carved monuments of the Tauroctony scenes from Mithraism that are preserved. They're in various museums, and they're all pretty unanimous in pointing to the galactic center as a place of transformation. It's the place that the initiate had to travel to. In other words, it's the place of initiation that the initiate had to travel to in order to get that vision of God, you might say, of the center, of the source. The galactic center was basically seen to be, as it is in the Mayan religion, the center and source of creation.
So, I guess I got off on sort of that tangent of thinking about the cathedrals. I guess what was going on in my brain is, even though kind of the Council of Nicaea and sort of Christianity kind of came along and sort of crushed Mithraism, and I guess the two questions that kind of arise are: is it a function of this processional awareness that like the era of Taurus died, that also kind of that understanding sort of died with it? And so on one hand we could say, oh gosh, it was lost because humans were stupid, but on the other hand, taking a greater like metaphysical perspective, would a person that understands these principles say it's not surprising that it disappeared?
Right. It's not surprising that things transformed 2,000 years ago, because it was the end of the age of Aries and the beginning of the age of Pisces, and that became the era of Christianity. And so it's no surprise that we're also approaching another transformational period right now. A lot of astrologers refer to this as the end of the age of Pisces and the beginning of the age of Aquarius. This is based on precession, but it's tracking precession with the position of the equinox sun moving into a new constellation, the constellation of Aquarius. What the Maya were looking at was actually 90 degrees away from there, perpendicular. They weren't interested in the equinox, they were interested in the solstice. So when you focus on the solstice alignments, then you understand how it is that the galactic alignment is like galactic midnight. It's basically, see, the thing about this is that, you know, having an awareness of precession is one thing, but understanding the importance of the galactic center in the sky is a completely other thing that seems to have been suppressed in Western traditions. It's a very strange thing because the galactic center can be noticed with the naked eye. It's a nuclear bulge. It's a wider part of the Milky Way. There's more bright stars in there. You have this mythologically potent thing there called the dark rift. It's caused by interstellar dust.
And does it look dark? I mean, is that why they call it that? It's like this little
Oh
dark...
yeah, it's like a gaping maw. I mean, if you looked at the Milky Way, you'd see it as this mysterious gaping maw. And so that's how the Maya mythologized it. They saw it as the gaping maw of the cosmic monster, or the transformational birthplace of the cosmic mother, the Milky Way. Now, if the Maya were able to do this in their mythologizing of the sky, I don't see why people in the old world wouldn't be doing this too. And it's apparent that they did. They just did it in sort of different ways. Mithraism, I think, is the way that they did it. However, see, what's going on here is the transformative power of the Great Mother principle. The Milky Way and the galactic center as the womb of the Milky Way as a transformative principle that's higher than monotheistic religions would have us believe, which have basically presented the idea that it's the God King is the one ruler. So any inkling of the Mother, the Great Mother, as the supreme principle of transformation and renewal in the cosmos just had to be expunged from Western religions.
And so that's why it was kind of crushed. This deeper knowledge, though, survives today. I mean, there's so many people that think, like, you know, that there's these secret orders, the Illuminati or whatever, and it seems like all their symbolism, like the eye on the back of the dollar bill, you know, that does kind of call to that sort of mythic belief. So is it like I mean, does it survive? You know, do they still know about it and they just keep it a secret? Or? I
think the wisdom survives in certain esoteric traditions, but it's operating on a very deep symbolic level. So if you, as a searcher, study and pierce the veil of these symbolic, esoteric belief systems, you will eventually come into an understanding that reveals this information. However, there's all kinds of veils and gates that you have to pass through in order to get there, and they're placed there as sort of protective mechanisms. It protects the secret divine wisdom from the insincere, or from those who are merely trying to gain power and wealth through understanding these secrets.
And I mean, do you think that's basically like the Westerners that maybe or maybe not, you know, kind of are at the head of all corporations and government? I mean, if they do have it, I mean, is that the thing? Is it a power? I know this is probably, you're not probably like the person to like bug about this because you're a very rational person, but
oh, that's right.
I mean, it seems like it's all being used for evil, but is it sort of like it's a power and it can be used for good and evil?
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. It is, well, there's two parts to that, really. I mean, oh, this is a great topic, really. There's two parts to this because the sacred wisdom sort of has a protective mechanism around itself. I mean, it's like the insincere can't touch it.
That's what I figure. So it's like, how could it be then, but it's associated with such evil.
The insincere can't do anything with it. It's like the dragon that guards the gold and the virginal maiden in the cave and can't do anything with either of them. However, the insincere, although they can't do anything with it, they can prevent others from getting to it.
And so that's what's really going on.
It's the main gatekeeper phenomenon. Like, but if you are truly sincere, at some point in your process, you have to encounter the gatekeeper that is trying to keep you from getting to that wisdom. And that gatekeeper is basically a shadow projection of one's own fears. so one has to sort of overcome one's own self-created demons. And we've been feeding those self-created demons throughout our whole lives. So this is where the process of detaching ourselves from the illusions that keep us feeding those demons. And in doing that, then we can move beyond the whole realm that keeps us limited.
I mean, I just thinking about like kind of my own, you know, personal demons and what I'm afraid of, my worst fears and all that. That the process you just described seems like immensely difficult. I mean, and so is that what you mean? You have to go through that to actually finally be able to know what it really means?
Well, it is a difficult process. It's the spiritual path, you know. If you're not sort of like working on these things, I mean, there's a place to enjoy life and not be sort of, you know, to not be constantly seriously, you know, working on these things. That's part of life. But also, when confronted, we have to sort of deal with our spiritual baggage, you know, and we have to have an orientation to that is healthy.
In seeking kind of to deepen your knowledge about these things, have you ever kind of in your own mythic personal journey, like have you ever had to face like the worst thing for you personally in doing so? Yeah,
and I think you know, part of that's been sort of like a very difficult part in my process is the effort to be very clear with this information, and then having people sort of actively and willfully try to misunderstand it or confuse it, misrepresent it. This is sort of a frustrating part of my own journey with this is to have to deal with the sea change, you know, to reconstruct this ancient galactic cosmology of the ancient Maya. I'm not arguing for space aliens coming down or any of this, and yet I see time and time and time again how my work is often just thrown into the same category with people that are suggesting, you know, very silly things.
I guess to get into the whole cultural phenomenon of 2012, because there, you know, what are sort of, I mean, I don't want you to, you know, talk a bunch of shit about everyone, obviously, but I mean, do you give any credence to any of the kind of out there theories that, like, you know, they were in contact with spirit beings, or that by doing drugs they, you know, got this, or that aliens came down, or that they're the remnants of something? Anything?
There's a whole spectrum of far out and wacky theories or ideas that are out there that somehow get attached into the same, you know, venue as 2012. I guess I would say that there's always a grain of truth at the root of a lot of these ideas, but there's a tendency in the modern world to over-literalize things.
Yes.
And so we have to be careful about how we tend to make things literal. But if a person examines any of these things and goes into it to any depth, one will sort of get beyond that sort of superficial level of the discussion to understand the real spiritual meaning underneath.
So I guess then the take-home lesson, I mean, kind of, I guess you got to fill it in for yourself, but it'd be something sort of like, if you'll come to the truth if you keep exploring the topic long enough, you'll come to your own truth in it. I mean,
yeah, and a good example of this unfortunate situation is how the mass media tends to reinforce the most superficial kind of interpretation.
Because it's the easiest to say.
That's true, and it's sort of like, ooh, it makes it seem real if you can make it a literal kind of thing. Like, for example, the whole thing with space aliens, or, you know, alien, UFOs, this kind of thing.
Yeah.
Well, the spiritual interpretation is that we are about to encounter a higher wisdom that comes from beyond what we are used to. You know, this is just the age-old spiritual challenge of opening up our consciousness to something that seems alien to us, but it's really part of who we are. Now, that's the spiritual interpretation. The literal interpretation of that, or how it tends to get manifested in the popular culture, is that hardware spaceships land from up there, and they're bringing us something that we don't really understand, and the hatch opens up and strange alien creatures come out, and they want something. They have something to do with us. We just don't understand it. See what I mean?
Yeah, it's a literal interpretation. It's like they're picking up on it out there in the ether and the culture and something they see these things, you know, their subconscious part of their being gets it,
Exactly.
and then their conscious mind kind of fills in the blanks. Sorry, I got kind of. I'm thinking like
That's getting kinda
I'm
loud,
thinking this
isn't it?
might be like a sign from the universe. It's time to sort of.
Yeah.